And we're also going to get this up on Facebook. And Shelly, I think we're good to go.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. You are tuned in to Everyone's Welcome, a fresh conversation about disability. And we have got a real treat for you today. Very excited for us to sit down with Wendy. Gabby and I created Everyone's Welcome to provide the opportunity for our audience to connect and to learn and just to be part of the greater community. And we bring people together for conversations around disability and mental health, diversity, inclusion. And our guests stop by to share their experiences and their stories that provide food for thought as we navigate the world in which we live now. Everyone's Welcome is a collaborative production of whole community inclusion at Jewish Learning Venture and Inclusion Innovations. Everyone's Welcome is captioned. So go ahead and click on that CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on View Captions. We are also streaming Everyone's Welcome on Facebook Live today, as we do every time. We're recording Everyone's Welcome. You'll receive the link in the email you shared with us when you registered, and then we invite you to share this in every episode with the people in your life. We invite your questions, we invite your comments, and encourage you to use the chat function for those comments and questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, co-founder, Gabby Kaplan-Mayer.
Shelly, thank you so much. So I'm gonna try doing an image description, Shelly, since I just learned this recently from my friend and colleague Alana. But for everyone who's watching who may be blind or low vision, I just to describe myself, I am a white woman with short brown curly hair and I'm wearing glasses and a navy blue blouse with a flower print. And today we are very pleased to welcome artist Wendy Elliott-Vandivier, who's a graduate of the Tyler School of Art at Temple University here in the Philadelphia area where I live. Wendy's been making art and making mischief since she was a young child growing up in Philadelphia. In college, she majored in sculpture and staged a funeral of a disabled poster child to lay stereotypes of pity and helplessness firmly to rest. Her paintings explore issues of family, memory, and experiences as a disabled woman. Her autobiographical cartoons focus on attitudinal barriers and stereotypes regarding disabilities and also some microaggressions that disabled people experience while living normal, uninspirational lives. Wendy's a photographer of micro scale monuments in nature, and she's often inspired by close up images that people tend not to notice in daily life, such as tree bark, dead leaves, flower anatomy, and water. So, welcome, Wendy. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you. Um, Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. And thank you to Shelly and Gabby for the wonderful work that you've been doing for many years to enhance inclusion and access for people with disabilities. For my image description, I'm a middle-aged white Jewish woman in a wheelchair. I have red curly hair and red lipstick. I'm wearing a red dress. And behind me are lots of family photos and my wedding ketubah. So lots of stuff all around me. So I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, so I'm going to just show you some examples of my cartoons. I do a lot of things with my art. I do oil painting, and as Gabby mentioned, I do photography. I do a lot of realistic portraits with my painting. And this is one of my earliest cartoons. And it shows quotes of things that people have actually said to me while I'm getting out of my van going to work. And I get inspiration for the new cartoons by just getting out in public and doing normal things like going to work, getting out of my van, eating in restaurants, and going to the doctor's office, traveling to new places. But obviously COVID put a real damper on these things. So I haven't got a lot of inspiration for new cartoons since I haven't been going to many places. But sometimes I'm unable to think of a good response at the time to some of the insensitive remarks or conduct of others. So I started writing things down on a notepad app on my cell phone. And eventually, after a few weeks or sometimes days, I get an idea for a cartoon. And I start to make rough sketches and ideas first, and then I refine them into detailed pen and ink drawings, and then I apply colored pencils. And I often use animals in the cartoons, especially my service dog as a kind of alter ego or comic insult dog to communicate things that are sometimes difficult to say in public. The color in my cartoons is happy, bright, and sweet, although the subject matter is not. I use humor and color to draw people in. I use a light touch to educate people about my experience living with a disability and some of the attitudinal barriers and microaggressions that I experience on a daily basis. So in this cartoon, you see a three-headed service dog who's responding to the different things that people say to me when I'm getting out of my car going to work. Hi, beautiful, but they're talking to the dog. It's good to see you out today. Like they let me out of the home for the day. One of the ones I hated so much is I don't think of you as disabled. And the service dog is growling back, I don't think of you as enlightened. One of the worst things that people said to me was, it's people like you who put my life in perspective. You know, things could be a lot worse. I could be you. Or they'll say, I'll pray for you. Jesus loves you. And my service dog is responding, aren't we Jewish, Mom? Ironically, this has never happened to me in the Jewish community. Nobody ever offered to pray for me. So these are just some examples. I'm not going to read everything on the cartoon. Here's another cartoon called Can I Pet Your Dog? Sometimes people with disabilities, sometimes people tend to avoid people with disabilities and consider their companions to be conversational go-betweens. For example, there are a lot of times when the person only feels comfortable talking to the non-disabled person and not the person with the disability. And this has happened to me a lot, especially from medical professionals that are sometimes will talk more to my husband than they'll talk to me. I can't tell you how many times people have asked my husband, can I pet your dog? So in this cartoon, you see a middle-aged woman wearing a purple shirt and jeans, and she's tapping the shoulder of a man to the right who's wearing a green shirt and brown pants, and he's on his cell phone with his head turned away. We don't even know who he is. Does he know me? Is he even part of this conversation? But she's asking him, can I pet your dog, while I'm sitting right there? And I just say, huh? But the service dog is saying, woof the, expletive deleted, why don't you ask her? So this unfortunately does happen to me, quite often in different situations. Here's another cartoon where, sometimes people will feel like they can ask you very personal questions. People that don't even know you feel that they can pry into your world. So in this cartoon, I'm showing a man on the left side, a tall, dark, handsome man on the left side, and I'm in my wheelchair on the right side, in a manual wheelchair when I was much younger. And the gentleman is saying, what happened to you? And I'm saying, I used to dance with the Bolshoi Ballet. During a performance one night, I slipped and fell off the stage. I landed in the orchestra pit and the conductor's wand severed my spine. But what am I thinking? Nothing. What happened to you? So this is a true story. I used to make these things up when I was younger, make up outlandish stories about my disability. Here's a cartoon that focuses on terminology and some of the words that society uses to describe people with disabilities. And there's a lot of euphemistic terminology that's been thrown out there in recent years, and a lot of words that I can't stand personally. For example, physically challenged. On the left side, I'm actually, this cartoon shows 5 little Wendy's that are lined up. The first one shows physically challenged, and I'm literally like Atlas with the world on my shoulders. I'm really physically challenged. The second one says differently abled, and I have 3 arms, an extra eye, a unicorn horn coming out of my head. I certainly have a lot of extra different abilities. The next one shows wheelchair bound, and I'm literally bound and gagged in my wheelchair. And the next one shows confined to a wheelchair. I literally have a padlock around my shoulders and my legs. And then the last one shows me with my arms up, smiling, and it says I'm free in my wheelchair, because in reality, the wheelchair is a source of freedom and mobility. It's not something that's necessarily confining. This one shows some of the experiences that I have had in the employment arena. I have a lot of experience as a human resources professional. And a lot of times you feel like you're being discriminated against in interviews, but it's always hard to tell if that's really happening, or hard to prove that it's happening. So in this cartoon, it shows me pulling up to a desk of the human resources manager. I'm wearing an olive green suit, and my hair is straightened. My curls are straightened in this picture. The human resources manager has silver hair, and he's wearing a conservative blue suit and a red tie. And behind me is my service dog holding her resume in her mouth. And what I'm saying is I'm a human resources professional with over 25 years of experience in multiple industries. I have a SPHR and SHRM SCP certifications. My diverse background combines work in the federal government, private industry, and community advocacy. Those are all true things about me. And my service dog is saying, I am a certified service dog with over 8 years of experience as a VP of dog operations management with a concentration in employee relations. Woof, woof. But what is the HR manager saying? I like to make fun of HR managers because I'm a recovering HR manager myself, but the HR manager is thinking she's in a wheelchair. She has a dog. So sometimes I think that that's all they see, and they don't see all that I bring to the table. This is a cartoon that talks about one of my favorite topics, accessible parking, and you see a car in the background with a license plate that says entitled. There's a woman that's running out of her car. She's wearing a jumpsuit, running suit, red shirt, her hair's flying in the wind. And she's saying, got a great parking space. And the tagline reads, Grandma's been dead for years, but her parking privileges live on. This is another true story of something that happened to me. I was hiking in upstate New York in Ithaca, beautiful parks, and I was really enjoying myself. And this woman comes up to me and says, I can tell you don't need any help. Otherwise, I'd ask. And my service dog has her quick response. She says, I can tell you need a muzzle. Here's another true story about a time when I went to get an ultrasound at a nearby local hospital. And the ultrasound tech looked very shocked. And when I came in by myself, she looked in the waiting room, saw that there was nobody there. And she said, how did you get here? And I said, I drove my van. And she said, that's amazing. You're so inspirational. And my service dog is offering her own sarcastic humor. She's wearing a little space helmet. And she says, they beamed us up on an intergalactic spaceship. That's how we got there. This is another true story. When my husband and I went to our favorite Italian restaurant, and the owner/waiter came up to our table, and he said to me, do you ever pray for something better? To not need a wheelchair? And for the first time in my life, I had an actual quick remark to say back to him. And I said, I have everything I need. I'm sitting there with my husband and my service dog under the table. We're drinking wine. But the service dog has her own sarcastic humor again. She says, "I need some chicken marsala with a side of penny." This cartoon focuses on service dogs. Here's my service dog, Lucy, on the left side, saying woof the, expletive deleted. And she's commenting on the different types of animals that are pawned off as service animals. Obviously, there are a lot of people that have invisible disabilities that use service animals, but I'm really calling out here is service animal abuse, where people that don't have disabilities are trying to take their little yapper dog on an airplane, or their service peacock on an airplane, or service pigs. A lot of these things are true stories. So there's a comfort cock, a therapy terrapin, a service snake. There's a spider hanging off of the tusk of the elephant. It says service spider, do not pet. And then taking up half the screen almost as the emotional support elephant. This is another cartoon that's kind of a takeoff of my other cartoon on terminology. And this one focuses on some of the myths and stereotypes about disability. So here you have 5 little Wendy's again, dressed in all different types of outfits. The first one says Super Crip, and I'm wearing a Superman costume and a red cape. I have the big S on my shirt, and I'm making a muscle, an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of muscle, and it says Super Crip. The next one says Inspirational. I'm wearing pastel pink and blue, colors that I hardly ever would wear myself. I have a little halo over my head, and it says Inspirational. The third one says Role Model. So many people say to me, you're such a role model, but I don't feel personally like I'm a role model. I'm just, being myself. So I have myself dressed completely in roles. I have challah bread for legs. I have challah on my hat. My shoes have little rolls. I'm completely decked out in roles. And then the fourth one over shows me in my wheelchair with a gray cloud above me that says pitiful, and there are little tears falling down. My hair is getting drenched. My clothes are drenched. It's so pitiful being disabled. And then the reality, the last one, again, I have my hands up in the air. It says, my shirt says disability pride on it. And the speech bubble says just me. So I'm not any of those things, any of those myths or stereotypes. I'm just being me. This is a true story of something that happened to me when I was younger, that one of my aunts tried to make, which she probably perceived as being a compliment, but it could have been damaging for someone, that, at that time I was a preteen. I was walking with crutches then and braces. And she said to me, "Boy, Wendy, if you had 2 good legs, you'd really knock them dead." And I have a little thought bubble that shows me doing some, karate moves. I've got boxing gloves on. My crutches have little flames bursting out of them. And what I'm saying back to her is, I knock them dead just the way I am. And that's really how I feel. I think that people with disabilities, we all can knock them dead just exactly the way we are. And it's part of our disability pride. This is another true story. All these cartoons are autobiographical. A few weeks after giving birth to a baby boy, Wendy went to a party. And this woman that I didn't know came into the party, and she saw, the scene where I'm holding a baby. There's a couple to the right who are kind of oogling and ogling over the baby. And this woman that comes in says, "And whose child is this?" She just couldn't fathom that, somebody in a wheelchair could actually be a parent, could be taking care of someone else. So it was a very disturbing experience for me at the time, and still, we remember it clearly to this day. And this is another true story. This is about my son, who's now a man, but at age 4, with great clarity, Wendy's son made a pronouncement. And he said, "You're just not standable, Mom." Like I was some kind of bendable, standable, Gumby mom. And I really loved this statement. There was a lot of clarity to it. He just thought I wasn't standable. I did everything else for him, just not standable. And it shows that he didn't view my disability in a negative light. It was just, who his mom was. This is a cover that I just completed for a book that I've done. It's called A Day of Questions, and it's about some of the types of questions that young children will ask people with disabilities. And in the book, I'm trying to encourage kids to ask questions and to learn about disabilities. Unfortunately, a lot of times kids will be asking questions and their parents will kind of pull them back, don't talk to that person or don't ask that question. And I think the kids will sometimes get the idea in their head that disability is a bad thing. So I hope that a book like this and encouraging questions will make the world a better place for people with disabilities in the future. And this cartoon is really my prayer for what a more perfect and more inclusive world would look like when people aren't saying all these wild things about me or at me. They're saying, I see you, I appreciate you, I value you, I welcome you, I hear you, I include you, I respect you, and I'm saying, I thank you. So if you want to see more of my art, this is my website, www.wendyevart.com. You can purchase the art, or if you're interested in purchasing the book when it comes out. I'm also doing a book of the cartoons and working on the cover for that right now. So you can contact me through my website or at my email address listed below, wendyev.artist@gmail.com.
Amazing, Wendy.
Thank you. Let me stop sharing. Okay.
Wow.
I kind of did a quick and dirty overview. Usually I talk more in detail about each cartoon, but don't have a lot of time. We want to allow time for the discussion and questions.
I have a friend who used to always say, in humor, there is truth.
Yes, definitely. And
And
humor is a good way to educate people and, to invite them in. I'm not hitting people over the head. I'm trying to use the bright color and the humor to draw them in and listen and learn. Sometimes, people don't realize, what they're saying. My son said that he made a comment, the road to hell is paved with well-intentioned comments. And I think that's really true.
Right. And then I'm thinking, I want to take those cartoons, and we've all met people who have said those things. I had a woman one time who was in charge of an inclusion initiative for a whole community. This is years ago. And I was talking about my experiences raising our son who has autism. And she said, she goes, I am just so grateful that my children are normal. And I was like, the eye roll thing. I wish I had your.
Right, I could do a cartoon for you too.
So read this now.
Okay.
People don't always think, and I just love how you also use visuals to tell not only your story, but really to speak truth for so many people as well. So I want to ask you, you're such a talented artist. When did you begin pursuing art, and was drawing an important part of your childhood?
Yeah, I've been making art my whole life. I'd always would make drawings, paintings, and sculpture since I was a small child. It's something that I enjoyed doing, and it came easily for me. And as a child, I took classes at the Philadelphia School Art League, and it was like an elementary school. And I went to another local school called Cheltenham Art Center when I was in junior high. And when it was time for me to go to college, I won the Philadelphia Board of Ed Scholarship in Art and the Philadelphia City Scholarship for all of my extracurricular community activities. And the scholarship enabled me to go to college for free, which was pretty amazing. And I graduated with honors from magna cum laude from Tyler School of Art of Temple University, where I majored in sculpture. And I did large scale environmental sculptures and a lot of conceptual pieces. And I also dabbled in painting, photography, and other areas. And I've continued to make art over the last several decades, even though I've worked in corporate America and civil rights enforcement for 40 years. I've still managed to do the art, and now I'm coming back and doing more of the art that I did before. And I'll talk more about that, in a little bit.
Great. Great.
Wendy,
Gabby.
yeah, so I wanted to let folks know we will have time after my questions and Shelley's questions for those who are with us. If you're watching on Facebook, you're also welcome to put a question in the comments there. So no worries, we'll get to that. And if you want to drop them in the chat at any point in the conversation, feel free. So Wendy, knowing you as I do, art is very, obviously essential to your life, but so is activism. Can you tell us when your activism around disability rights began?
Well, disability activism for me started at a really early age. I've been disabled since birth, have spina bifida, and I use a wheelchair. And unlike many of my peers at the time, I grew up in a very mainstreamed environment. I think I was mainstreamed before the term was even coined. I went to regular public schools in Philadelphia, where I was always the only disabled kid in the class. I thought I was the only one everywhere I went. I refused to go to Widener, which is a segregated school for children with disabilities in Philadelphia. I wanted to go to the same school as the other kids on my block. And my parents were great. They really supported me in this. And I think that was my first experience being a disability rights activist. I refused to go to the separate school for disabled kids. Interestingly, I never knew any other people with disabilities while I was growing up. It wasn't until I was 18 years old and I was a freshman in college that I got involved in the disability rights community. I became president of Disabled in Action of Pennsylvania. And I've continued with my advocacy both within and outside the system for almost 40 years. I was a leader in Philadelphia in the late 1970s. You can tell how old I am, in the early 80s, to force SEPTA, which is our local transportation authority, to put lifts on buses. We demonstrated throughout the city, blocking major intersections, and we even took over a SEPTA board meeting at one point. I was never arrested for any of these stunts, mainly because paddy wagons were not accessible back then. And so I never got arrested. They always try to arrest the photographer, or my husband tried to arrest him a few times, but they never got me. I also served as chair of the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities. I did that for about 8 years for the city of Philadelphia. I was on the board of directors for the American Association of People with Disabilities for another 8 years. And I'm currently co-president of the United Spinal Greater Philadelphia chapter. And my disability advocacy never stops. I think I'm more of an advocate now than an activist. I'm not out there on the street doing things that I did when I was in my 20s, but it never stops. And I don't plan on ever retiring from this. I think change is really slow, and there's still a lot that needs to be done.
I hear you so much, Wendy. You've got an impressive portfolio of activism and change.
Yeah, thank you.
It's true. We never can stop, because until people are seen as people.
I know. I retired from my HR manager role about 1.5 years ago, and I've never really retired. I'm doing art and advocacy, and I'm busy all day long.
Exactly. Well, redefining, there's another thing, redefining retirement.
Right.
That looks like.
Exactly.
So let's focus a little bit on your experiences in the Jewish community, and how accessible are things in the Jewish community, and just what's that experience been like for you?
Okay. So growing up, we were never affiliated with the synagogue. And my first exposure was when my husband and I tried to find a wheelchair accessible synagogue to be married in, and to find a rabbi that was willing to marry us, because at that time my husband was not Jewish. He converted after we were married 16 years. And so he did become a Jew, but at the time it was difficult to find anyone that would marry us. We found a Reformed temple that had an accessible entrance and restroom, but the bima was not accessible, or the platform where the Torah is kept. And we had to have our huppah, or the canopy, at the foot of the stairs of the bima. A few years later, we joined another Reform temple. Again, the bima was not accessible. And also there were fixed pews where all the congregants sat, and none of these were accessible. And I had to sit behind the last row. And when the congregation was asked to rise, when the ark was opened, everybody gets up, and all I can see are the butts or the tuchuses of the people in front of me. And I could never see the Torah being lifted from the ark, or I could never see the person blowing the shofar on the high holidays. However, even more disturbing than this was the fact that even though we were members of the synagogue for 4 years, no one ever really talked to me, except for 2 of my cousins who were also members. So obviously not a very welcoming place. So then I also, for the past 25 years, I've been a member of a very progressive Reconstructionist synagogue. And the synagogue still has a lot of barriers. There's no accessible or fully accessible restroom, a semi-accessible bima that you have to access by going a roundabout route through several doors and rooms. But although there are these kinds of physical barriers, the people are very accessible, and that's what keeps me there. That's what's kept me there for 25 years. They're friendly, welcoming. They'll actually talk to me. And I also serve on the synagogue's board of directors, and I chair the inclusion committee, where I work on all types of inclusion issues, LGBTQ, disability, racial and ethnicity, interfaith, the whole gamut of different inclusion issues. And I also had my bat mitzvah at the synagogue 20 years ago. This is something that typically occurs when you're 13 years old. But at that time, my parents, who were not really religious at all, we were very, very secular family, but they didn't think it was really necessary for a girl. But that's a whole other issue. And I was part of a group of 10 women who had our ceremony together, and we all read different portions of the Torah. And this was the first time in my life that I was ever actually on a bima. At that time, I was using a lightweight manual wheelchair, and one of the women who was in my bat mitzvah group volunteered to lift me up. There was one step up to get onto the bima. And this is something that would be impossible for me today, because I use a heavy motorized power wheelchair. So for the next 20 plus years, I never got to go on the bima again, never had an aliyah, which is an honor when you get to chant a prayer prior to the reading of the Torah. But ironically, during COVID, when our services were all on Zoom, I finally got to have an aliyah for the second time in my life. I believe that a lot of religious institutions try to hide behind the fact that they're exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act or the ADA. Many lobbied against having religious institutions included in the ADA. I can remark that it's easier to get into like a Target store or a Lowe's. They've got, automatic openers. Target has wheelchair accessible dressing rooms. They have accessible bathrooms. All these places are, have to comply with the ADA, but synagogues are, 30 years or 40 years behind, behind the time. And
we often, one of the greatest advocates in the Jewish world, Rabbi Lynn Landsberg, used to say that the ADA is a moral mandate.
Exactly.
Communities. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait a second. Losing my earpiece. So a lot of synagogues and other religious entities that are controlled by religious organizations synagogues and other religious organizations and entities controlled by religious organizations are exempt from the ADA, except for the employment provisions. However, if a synagogue rents space to programs funded in whole or part by state or federal dollars, the funded program will be required to conform to other non-discrimination laws. In addition, if a congregation rents space to an independent daycare center, for example, the daycare center is required to comply with the ADA. But, as you said, Shelley, even though religious institutions have this exemption from the ADA, they still should open their doors to disabled people because it's the moral and the right thing to do. We answer to a higher power, higher than the U.S. Department of Justice and so forth. We have, and about the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world. This concept really resonates with me personally. I'm really not somebody who prays in the synagogue. I like to take action to make the world a better place. And I believe that it's up to us to ensure that there's disability access and justice for all other marginalized groups of people.
Sorry, I had to get my unmute button. Wendy, I want to just appreciate that one of the things you said at synagogue that I want to raise up is that you said something like the people were accessible. In other words,
Right.
the attitude and the culture was there,
Right.
and that for those who are listening, whose communities may be wrestling with some building issues and figuring it out, that like what a difference that made, that the attitude and the culture, that you're in a community where you belong, to reference Shelley's book, you're a leader. And I hear that it's not perfect with the situation you're describing in any way, but when the attitude, when you're with a group of people who are working towards better solutions for people with disabilities, what a difference that makes.
Exactly. You can have a completely accessible building, but if nobody talks with you, welcomes you, interacts with you, it really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And I think that attitudinal barriers is really, still an issue, even though we have civil rights, in the larger community. We still have chronic unemployment, 70% unemployed, unemployment rate for people with disabilities. It's still the attitudes that are really the stumbling block.
Well, I have one more question for you, and Shelley has one more question for you, and then I want to go to our participants. We have a very interesting and timely question. But I just wanted to take a moment to go back to your art, Wendy. You mentioned the book that you're working on now. Tell us about your goals right now at this moment in your life as an artist.
Okay. Well, I feel that I've come full circle in my life. When I was younger, I was doing a lot of art and activism. And later I worked in civil rights enforcement with the Office for Civil Rights in the US Department of Education for 9 years. And then I spent 30 years in corporate America as an HR, human resources manager. And right now I'm combining my art and my activism. In my own life, I've never separated my art from my activism. And I've never separated my Judaism from my advocacy either. It's all about, repairing the world for me, making the world a better, more accessible place for all of us. My goals as an artist are to make my work visible beyond the museum. It would be nice to have my work shown in a gallery or a museum, but my art is really about social change. I want the disabled community to feel empowered by my art and develop their own sense of disability pride. I also aim to give disabled people a voice to tell their own stories, just as my art has given me a voice. And I want non-disabled people to learn from my art and change their attitudes about disability. I hope that my art can help educate non-disabled people who are often unaware of their microaggressions. And I hope that my work will help foster acceptance and respect among non-disabled allies. And I've recently created this coloring/storybook on disability awareness for children in the kindergarten to second grade level. And it was funded by a grant from the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council and a group called Disability Equality in Education. And my story is called A Day of Questions, and it focuses on the many questions that children have about disability. The questions pop up in the story as I'm going about my daily routines, getting out of bed, having to use a lift to get out of bed, uh, driving a van, swimming in a pool, taking a bath, all basic things, as well as dancing, skiing, other things that I like to do. And when you open the book, on the left side of each page, there's a child that's asking a question. And I try to include children of all different races and ethnicities. I want kids to be able to see themselves when they open the book. And then on the right side, there's an illustration that I have about how I do this particular activity. So kids have asked me things over the years, why are you in a wheelchair? Or one even asked me, where do you sleep? He was upset. He didn't realize that I could get out of the bed to sleep. And oftentimes they ask me, can I pet your dog? Unfortunately, their parents may pull them back and try to discourage such questions. And this may result in the child developing the idea that disability is a bad thing. And my hope is that a book such as this will help young children to develop positive attitudes about disabled people and encourage more questions and learning. And I think better actions as they grow and include people with disabilities when we're in the workplace and and beyond. And I'm very excited about how my art can be used to make a difference in educating young children about disability, with the hopes of making the world a future world a better place for people with disabilities. And the book is going to be used throughout the state, along with a video that I created and lesson plans that are being prepared by the Disability Equality and Education Organization. And I'm also working on another book that's going to be a compilation of all the cartoons, some of which I showed you today. And it's going to be called Oh, the Things They'll Say. And the subtitle will be Transforming Daily Comments and Attitudes About Disability into Art That Educates and Enlightens. So I'm looking forward to, to having those books come out soon.
Thank you, Wendy. And we'll share all that, as you'll share with us as things are released, and we'll share it with our community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That sounds great. This is amazing. I have 2 dogs, 2 Shelties, and they both were just barking like crazy, as Shelties do. And then they stopped. They just, and one of them is deaf.
Really?
It's really hard to, just quiet. Anyway.
And my service dog is snoozing away
Right?
under my wheelchair.
We love those. We love our 4-legged family
Right.
members. So Wendy, I want to just go back to the Jewish community. And I think this is applicable for many faith communities. But primarily, what changes have you seen in the Jewish community over time? And what do you hope occurs in terms of accessibility and inclusion? And I'm going to add belonging to that question.
Right. I love the word belonging. We need to include it more often.
Absolutely.
So I've seen more accessibility in some synagogues over the years. There are a few synagogues that started out as a havara, or a small group that meets in people's homes, or they were upstairs in buildings that were shared with other organizations, and they didn't have an elevator. There were a lot of very cool synagogues that I really wanted to join, 40 years ago that I couldn't join. But over the years, a lot of these synagogues have moved into new spaces, and they have incorporated accessibility into the design of their facilities. And as part of my work on the board of my synagogue, I try to make the quote business case for diversity and inclusion. We're a really small congregation that has become even smaller over the years, and a lot of our members are aging and developing disabilities as a result. And I always stress to the board, I think they're tired of hearing me say this, but making our congregation an accessible and inclusive and welcoming place will help us to increase and grow our membership. The synagogue currently has a ramp leading into the main sanctuary and is in the process of installing 2 exterior and interior doors that are going to be better for security. but they've agreed to put automatic door openers on both of these doors. And these changes are not only good for people with disabilities, they can help elderly congregants that have trouble opening the doors. They can help parents, pushing strollers, babies in strollers. They can help people that are delivering food and tables and chairs and other things to the synagogue. Accessibility is good for everybody. And we've seen that in the larger community when we talk about curb cuts and other types of things that have benefited everybody. And I hope that religious institutions will be more welcoming to people with various types of disabilities. I've been talking a lot about my own personal physical disabilities. But there's hundreds of different kinds of disabilities, and where they're talking about physical, sensory, intellectual, mental health, chronic illnesses, autism, many other disabilities that are, that we need to be aware of. And I hope that religious institutions will reach out to people with various disabilities and survey their needs. Talk to them. I always say, talk to me, find out what I need, involve me in the decision-making process. They should consider developing a task force composed of congregants with various types of disabilities, clergy, board members, facility managers, administrators, and other interested people to work on identifying what are the key critical barriers to participation, and then develop a plan of action to address those issues. And I think that the Jewish community, like all communities, is stronger when it lives up to its values, when it's welcoming, diverse, moral, and respectful of everyone. And as Leviticus instructs us, you shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. It's time for all of us to remove the stumbling blocks of architectural, communication, attitudinal barriers. And we in our various religious communities must partner with the larger community and rekindle our commitment to full inclusion, equality, and opportunity for all people, including those with disabilities.
Wendy, thank you. So much to take in. We have a question that I want to share very timely. I because I live in the Philadelphia area where Wendy is. Her presentations that she does with children and teenagers, I'm sure they're great with adults too. I happen to use Wendy as an educator with kids and teens. They are incredible. And we had a program at my synagogue, Mishkan Shalom, before the pandemic where Wendy brought her art and engaged the kids in an art experience. And they are literally still talking about it. And we also did an online program with Wendy with our teenagers who are part of our teen assistant program this past year, and it worked beautifully online. So I just had to give a little commercial for you, Wendy.
I'm available to come and talk to your
Yes,
groups.
yes, because it's such a great program. So
Thank you.
this was really interesting. Will put in the chat earlier after you had shared your cartoons something that just happened this week, and I think it's like so demonstrative of with all the progress, with all the activism, how there's just still so much happening in the world with disability rights. And he was curious if you had seen the news story about the para Olympian who I believe is blind and deaf and was, I don't understand it. I have read a little bit about it. I'm trying to break it down, but was essentially told that could not bring a a personal care attendant along to the Olympics the Paralympics in order to participate. And I guess the question was your thoughts on that. Might you do a cartoon around that? Do you take inspiration from what you see in the news?
Yeah, I definitely do take inspiration from what I see in the news. That's such an egregious thing, that happened, and such basic accommodations that aren't going to cost anything or not going to, impose an undue burden, so to speak, on on the organization. It's just horrifying that that we're still being excluded and denied, basic accommodations, and I trying to get inspiration, from that and other experience I've had, like flying. There's planes are a terrible experience if you have a disability. About 2 years ago, before the pandemic, my husband and I went to Paris, and it was a horrible, I mean, once I was in Paris, I was just in love. I want to, live there. But getting there on the plane was horrible. I had to spend, 6-7 hours on the plane, had to be carried into the seat, give up my wheelchair, not be able to use a bathroom for, 6-7 hours. It was horrible. It makes me not want to get on a plane again. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to portray this in another cartoon about flying while disabled. That's another idea that I have. But there's lots of issues throughout around the world, and in the United States, I think things are a lot better. My daughter-in-law is from Taiwan, and she says that this is like disability heaven here when she sees all the the aids and accommodations like that I have with the van with the lift and my fancy wheelchair. And but it's so much worse for people in other countries.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, Wendy. I have heard the same, and it just let us keep being the model then and pushing forward, since we see so much work to do.
Mhm. And we're the largest minority group in the nation, 1 out of 4 people with a disability, and we have a lot of spending power, and people need to make things accessible and open to us.
That includes websites and
Yeah, definitely.
anything where people order products. It's just best practice. It's
Right,
smart business to include everyone.
right.
Wendy, you're amazing. And I don't say that as a platitude.
I'm not
I
going to put
say
you in a cartoon, don't worry.
right. No, I no, just I appreciate your perspective and look forward to talking to you more. My husband converted to Judaism after 18 years of marriage. I think
Really,
we
yeah,
still
with no rush.
yeah,
16, 18 years.
yeah, somewhere in there. And people can reach you again through your website. And we will also, when we send out the information about today's episode with the link to the episode to everyone who signed up, we'll include your website information there too.
Thank you.
So good. I'm just gonna see about sharing my screen. Yes, that was my garden from last year. There we go. So next time, speaking of community, and Wendy, you talked about faith communities kind of coming together, and that fits really well with our next episode in 2 weeks on August 5th. We'll be talking to Karen Jackson. The picture of Karen Jackson is to the right. She has short blonde hair, and she is wearing a black top with white embroidery. And Karen is the founder and the executive director and board chair, or executive director emerita, I should say, and board chair of Faith Inclusion Network in Norfolk, Virginia. And the photo to the right of the screen is Michelle Munger, and Michelle is white. They're both white women. Michelle has a big, beautiful smile on her face. She's wearing glasses. She has curly brown hair, and she's wearing kind of a paisley top. Michelle is the interim executive director of Faith Inclusion Network. So Karen founded FIN in 2008 to provide resources to an interfaith group of congregations in the Norfolk area, and is now poised to deliver FIN to into the national spotlight. And a full disclosure, I've been a national advisor to FIN, and I'm now proud to be a board member at this exciting time of expansion. Karen's experience comes from being a mother. Her daughter Samantha is autistic, and Karen's work as a parish advocate at Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church, which is her parish, led to founding the Faith Inclusion Network. And she just stepped down as executive director, and now she is the board chair of FIN. Under Karen's leadership, FIN hosts biannual faith community disability inclusion retreats for national and international leaders in the field. and has held biannual conferences featuring local and national speakers. And Karen is also the author of Loving Samantha, and it is the story of her expectations and her hopes and dreams, and certainly her daughter her daughter Samantha's hopes and dreams of being involved in their faith community. And Michelle is the interim executive director. She is the parent of two young men on the autism spectrum. She and her husband Stephen weathered the active duty military lifestyle and settled in Newport News, Virginia. She holds a bachelor's degree in family development from American Military University and a master's in religious education from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary. She's got an extensive history serving in a variety of military and civilian church staff positions. And Michelle is an award-winning author of Margins of Grace, Becoming Champions of Faith and Family in the Midst of Disability. And we're just so excited that they're going to be joining us on August 5th. We'll be sending out the information to everyone very, very shortly. And Gabby,
Yes,
take
Shelley.
us, bring it home.
Okay, everyone. Once again, thank you all, and special thanks to Wendy. Shelley and I both have books that you can find wherever you buy your books, your local retailer, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle. Check them out. And for those of you who are involved in early childhood education or are parents or grandparents, Shelley, I think we've got the next slide. Our new book at Jewish Learning Venture that we just put out this past February, In My Kahila. You can purchase it from us before you head back to school. It's a great time to introduce the values of diversity and inclusion. And as Shelley said, we will notify everyone who's registered today when the recording is up so that you can share Wendy's amazing talk. I was making sure that we were on Facebook Live. So if you're on Facebook, you can also go to jewishlearningventure.org. And if you appreciated the conversation and Wendy's art, share it on your Facebook page. I'm going to put in the chat, here's a link to our archive so you can check all those episodes of Everyone's Welcome out there. Shelley and I, we're always here to continue the conversation. Reach us by email, Facebook, LinkedIn, and let your friends and colleagues know. We are looking forward to that next conversation with Karen and Michelle so much. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and be well.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Wendy.